Talon Vesk stood at the cosmic wormhole crossroad, which was a fancy way of saying he was loitering in the universe's worst parking lot. The kind of place where you could get mugged by an alien who then politely offered to sell you toothpaste. It was never quiet here, but today it was louder than a politician caught lying, because something strange was about to happen. Talon, interstellar diplomat and part-time cynic, peered at the flickering lights of the wormhole entrances. He wasn't sure if it was the universe's version of a disco night or just another glitch in reality. Either way, it was giving him a headache. "Vesk," barked a voice through his earpiece, rough as gravel and twice as pleasant. "You see in this, you mean the light show." "Yeah, hard to miss," Talon replied, his tone dry enough to start a fire in a desert. "Not just that, you idiot," the voice grumbled. It belonged to Drax, Talon's less-than-charming aide. "I mean the ships, the Zelthar ones." Talon squinted, spotting a fleet of ships that looked like they were designed by someone whose only reference was a spiky fruit. Their ominous shapes hovered, casting shadows like the universe's worst haircuts. "Well," Talon said, "if they're here to sell cosmetics, I'm all ears. They're not here to sell anything. They're here to clone a perfect human." Talon paused, then let out a laugh that sounded suspiciously like a cough. "Perfect human. Have they seen our politicians or our reality TV? Apparently not. They stole DNA samples from a research vessel. They're planning on cooking up some kind of ideal specimen. Christ, could they pick a worse plan? Probably," Drax replied, his voice as comforting as a rusty nail. "But do you really want to find out?" Talon sighed, glancing at the Zelthar ships again. "Looks like I'm going to have to play space babysitter." Fan-freaking-tastic. As Talon made his way towards his ship, the SS Cynicism, he couldn't help but wonder what a perfect human would even look like. He imagined someone with the body of a fitness model, the mind of a chess grandmaster, and the personality of a potato. It was the stuff of nightmares. Inside the SS Cynicism, the ship's AI, Halpha, greeted him. "Good day, Talon." "Avoiding work as usual." "Oh, you know me too well," Talon replied, strapping himself into the pilot's seat. "Any messages?" "Just one," Halpha said. "Your mother called, wants to know when you're going to get a real job." "Tell her I'm working on it," Talon muttered, activating the ship's thrusters. As the Cynicism zipped through the void like a cosmic mosquito, Talon considered his next move. Negotiating with the Zelthar was like trying to convince a cat to take a bath. It was going to be messy, and someone was definitely going to get scratched. "Halpha, open a channel to the Zelthar flagship," Talon commanded. "Opening channel," the AI replied. "Try not to sound too human, it might scare them." The screen flickered to life, revealing a Zelthar captain with skin that looked like bad wallpaper and eyes that screamed, "I'm plotting your demise." "I am Captain Zorvok," the alien said, voice smooth yet menacing. "What do you want, human?" "Oh, just a chat," Talon replied, dripping sarcasm like a leaky faucet. "Heard you're in the market for some human DNA. Thought maybe I could interest you in a subscription to bad ideas instead." Zorvok's expression soured, which was an improvement. "Our plans are none of your concern." "Right, because cloning a perfect human is such a private affair," Talon quipped. "Let me guess you think you can just waltz in, steal some genetic code, and whip up the universe's next top model." Zorvok's nostrils flared, which Talon assumed was a sign of annoyance or constipation. "We will not be deterred by your insolence." "Ah, but my insolence is part of my charm," Talon grinned. "Look, let's cut the crap. Stop your little science experiment, and maybe we can avoid a diplomatic incident." "Diplomacy is for the weak," Zorvok sneered. "And yet here we are talking," Talon shot back. "Tell you what, why don't you take this chance to back off before I call an authority much scarier than myself?" "Who could possibly be scarier than you?" Zorvok asked, genuinely curious. "My mother," Talon deadpanned. There was a pause, as if even alien technology had to recalibrate for that level of sarcasm. Zorvok's eyes narrowed. "You waste our time." "On the contrary," Talon said, leaning back with a smirk. "I'm making your day more entertaining." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Talon with a sense of satisfaction and a growing sense of dread. If the Zelthar were truly committed to creating this perfect human, then things could get ugly fast, and he wasn't just talking about the genetic experiments. He tapped a few buttons on the console, bringing up the latest intel on the Zelthar's research. The files were filled with diagrams, equations, and jargon that Talon couldn't fully understand. But he did catch the gist. These aliens were trying to play God with a toolkit from the cosmic dollar store. "Halpha, any suggestions?" Talon asked, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down like a cosmic anvil. "Run," Halpha offered. "Tempting," Talon admitted. But no, not yet. He needed a plan, and fast. Something that could derail the Zelthar's experiments without blowing up half the galaxy in the process. That would probably be frowned upon in his next performance review. As the SS Cynicism drifted through the inky black, Talon couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to be tangled in a web of cosmic stupidity. But then again, that was standard operating procedure in his line of work. He flipped open a comm line to Drax. "Hey, you still there?" As if I could escape, Drax grumbled. "Got any bright ideas?" "Yeah, don't die." "Solid advice," Talon chuckled. "Got anything else?" "Maybe hit up the Galactic Council," Drax suggested. "They might not care, but at least they'll pretend to listen." "Pretending's their specialty," Talon agreed. "All right, I'll give them a ring." As he dialed in the frequency for the Galactic Council, Talon couldn't help but marvel at how the universe's greatest minds had somehow failed to come up with an interstellar do not disturb sign. The bureaucrats that answered looked as enthused as sloths at a dance-off. "This is Talon Vesk," he announced, adopting his best "I'm not here to waste your time" voice. "I've got a situation that requires your attention." The council representative, a woman who looked like she was born in a boardroom, raised an eyebrow. "A situation?" "Yeah," Talon said. "Some Zelthar idiots think they can clone a perfect human. I doubt it'll end with a beauty pageant." The representative sighed, a sound like the universe giving up. "We'll look into it." "I need more than look into it," Talon pressed. "I need action, and you'll get it," she replied, with all the enthusiasm of a brick. "In due course." "Great," Talon muttered, terminating the call. "Looks like we're on our own, Halfa." "Isn't it always?" Halfa replied. Talon drummed his fingers on the console, a plan starting to form. It would require finesse, cunning, and a level of bullshit he wasn't sure he could muster, but he had to try. After all, saving humanity from being cloned into oblivion seemed like a decent use of his time. "Halfa, plot a course back to the Zelthar fleet," he ordered. "Back to the bad ideas, then," the AI quipped. "Better than doing nothing," Talon replied. "And who knows, maybe I'll talk them out of it." "That'll be the day," Halfa said as the ship changed course. As the SS Cynicism headed back towards the wormhole crossroads, Talon couldn't help but smirk. He always did enjoy a good challenge, and if there was one thing he knew, it was that making a mess of things was sometimes the best way to clean up the universe. "All right, Zelthar," Talon murmured, staring at the looming shapes of the alien ships. "Let's see if you can handle a meddling human." Talon leaned back in the SS Cynicism's pilot's seat, tapping his foot to an imaginary beat. The universe hummed around him, a discordant symphony of chaos and bureaucracy. He needed help, and not the kind you got from therapy or a bottle. He needed experts who could navigate this galactic mess without getting their hands too dirty, or at least not dirtier than they already were. "Halfa, who's the best geneticist that owes me a favor?" Talon asked, squinting at the screen as if it might yield a miracle. "Dr. Mira Solari," Halfa replied. "You saved her from that runaway nanobot incident last year." "Ah, the nanobot debacle." "Good times," Talon mused, his voice dripping with irony. "Get her on the line." The screen flickered, and soon enough Dr. Mira Solari's face appeared. She was in her lab, surrounded by equipment that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi horror film. Her hair was tied back in a practical bun, and her eyes had the kind of intelligence that could cut through nonsense like a hot knife through butter. "Talon," she said, her tone a mix of curiosity and a hint of dread, "what disaster have you gotten yourself into this time?" "Funny you should ask," Talon grinned, leaning forward. "Got a Zelthar-sized problem. They're trying to clone a perfect human, you know, standard Tuesday." Mira sighed, the kind of sigh that could deflate a blimp. "Let me guess, they stole some DNA, and now they're playing God without a user manual." "Bingo," Talon replied. "I need your brain on this. How do we stop them without blowing up the galaxy?" "First, you'll need more than just my brain," Mira said, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "This kind of operation requires finesse, not just good looks and charm." "Well, I'm screwed then," Talon quipped. "What do you suggest?" "Get yourself a damn good pilot," she said. "You'll need someone who can maneuver through whatever defenses those Zelthar have set up." "Jackson Quill still in business?" Talon asked, recalling the Daredevil pilot with a penchant for chaos and caffeine. "Last I heard, he's still flying and still drinking enough coffee to keep a small planet awake." Mira nodded. "I'll contact him." "Meet me at the Heron Nebula. We can plan our shenanigans there." "On my way," Talon said, closing the connection. Halfa set course for the Heron Nebula. "As you wish, Captain Disaster," Halfa replied, the ship humoring him with a smooth change in trajectory. The Heron Nebula was a cosmic paint splatter of gases and debris, an excellent meeting place for those who preferred their conversations unmonitored and their deals unsanctioned. As the SS Cynicism docked at an abandoned space station, Talon noted that the dust here had an almost welcoming air, like a neglected pub where you were strangely part of the furniture. Mira was already there, setting up holographic displays of Zelthar ships, DNA sequences, and what looked suspiciously like cocktail recipes. "Glad you could make it," she greeted Talon with a nod as he approached. "Jackson's running late, as usual." "Wouldn't be Jackson if he wasn't," Talon chuckled. "What's the plan?" Before Mira could answer, the door slid open, and Jackson Quill strode in like he owned the place, or at least owed it money. He wore a jacket that might have once been fashionable on a planet none of them had heard of, and his swagger was only slightly undermined by the massive cup of coffee in his hand. "Sorry, got caught in traffic," Jackson announced, collapsing into a chair. "Space traffic, if you can believe it. Damn Zelthar and their DNA-stealing shenanigans. What's the play, Vesk? Glad you could join us, Caffeine Cowboy," Talon smirked. "Mira, you were saying, the Zelthar have more than just DNA samples," Mira began, her tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They've been capturing humans, studying them to refine their cloning process. They want behavioral data, not just genetic." "Great, so we're dealing with aliens who think they're anthropologists now," Talon muttered. "Why not just watch reality TV? It's a masterclass in human behavior." "That's probably why they're so eager to make a better version," Jackson quipped, sipping his coffee as if it held all the answers. "We need to get those humans out," Mira said firmly. "And destroy their research without them knowing what hit them." "Simple," Jackson shrugged. "Just sneak into a heavily guarded alien fleet invisible to our sensors, grab the hostages and blow up some files. Piece of cake. Glad you're on board with the optimism." Talon rolled his eyes. "Let's break it down. Jackson, you can get us in. If by get us in you mean fly through a death trap, then sure." "Easy peasy," Jackson grinned, his enthusiasm bordering on madness. "Good, Mira, any way to mess with their research remotely. I can rig a few devices to corrupt their data once we're close enough," she nodded. "But we need direct access to their systems." "All right," Talon said, rubbing his hands together like a scheming villain, though he felt more like a hapless hero. "Let's prep. Jackson, ready your ship. We'll rendezvous at the edge of the Zelthar fleet. Mira, get your tech toys ready." As they dispersed to prepare, Talon felt a familiar mix of dread and excitement. It was like playing chess on a board where half the pieces wanted to kill you and the other half were just confused. But if there was one thing he thrived on, it was chaos, and possibly caffeine. Maybe he'd grab a coffee before they launched this fool's errand. A few hours later, they gathered in Jackson's ship, the Laughing Serpent. The name was fitting, Talon thought, since anyone who rode in it was likely to be laughing or screaming within minutes. The cockpit was cramped, filled with tech and the smell of burnt circuits, coffee, and danger. "All right, ladies and gents," Jackson declared, flicking switches with a practiced ease. "Let's go annoy some aliens." The ship blasted off, and Talon watched the stars blur into streaks of light, feeling a pang of nostalgia for the simplicity of terrestrial traffic jams. They were heading for a fleet of ships that could vaporize them with a sneeze, and yet somehow this seemed like the best option. Funny how life worked. Approaching the Zelthar fleet was like sneaking up on a rabid dog and hoping it was friendly. Jackson guided the Laughing Serpent with the precision of a man who had crashed more ships than most people had piloted. "All right, there's a blind spot in their patrol pattern," Jackson said, pointing at the holographic display. "We slip in there, nice and quiet-like." "Nice and quiet," Talon repeated, as if saying it would make it true. "Mira, get ready to do your thing." "Always am," she replied, her fingers dancing over her devices, prepping them for the upcoming infiltration. Jackson maneuvered the ship with the subtlety of a cat burglar who had just taken a correspondence course in stealth. They slid between two Zelthar cruisers, the ships looming over them like cosmic predators. Talon held his breath, half expecting alarms to blare and laser fire to rain down upon them. Instead, there was silence, save for the hum of their own engines. "We're in," Jackson announced, as the ship nestled into a docking bay. Now, the fun part. Talon, Mira, and Jackson suited up, checking their gear. The plan was simple: sneak in, grab the humans, fry the data, and get out before anyone realized they weren't part of the furniture. They slipped from the ship, moving through the corridors with a mix of stealth and bravado. The Zelthar architecture was all sharp angles and intimidating shadows, like someone had taken a Dali painting and told it to behave. Talon led the way, Mira at his side, Jackson bringing up the rear and humming a tune that was probably not intended for tense infiltration scenarios. As they approached the lab where the humans were being held, Talon couldn't help but chuckle. "What's so funny?" Mira whispered. "Just thinking," Talon replied, "that if these aliens really wanted to understand humans, they should have just invited us for drinks." Mira smirked, their loss. The door to the lab slid open, revealing a room filled with humans in various states of bewilderment and frustration. They were restrained but not harmed, which was a minor relief in this sea of insanity. "All right, folks," Talon called out, catching their attention. "Field trip's over. We're getting you out." The humans looked at him like he'd just announced free candy. It was heartening to know that desperation could still be counted on to incite hope. Mira moved to the main console, her devices already at work corrupting the Zelthar's precious data. "This will only take a moment," she assured, her focus unbreakable. As the files began to crumble into digital dust, Jackson and Talon worked quickly to free the captives, who responded with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Who are you guys?" one of them asked, rubbing her wrists where the restraints had been. "Ambassadors of bad ideas," Talon grinned. Now let's move before our gracious hosts notice. The group hustled back toward the laughing serpent, Mira ensuring the data was beyond recovery. With everyone aboard, Jackson prepared for the tricky part, leaving as quietly as they came. We're about to find out if we've overstayed our welcome, Jackson stated, fingers dancing over the controls. The Zelthar fleet remained silent, an ominous calm that was both reassuring and unnerving. As they slipped away, Talon couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. Think they'll miss us, he asked, watching the ships fade from view. Only if they find out who we are, Mira replied, a satisfied gleam in her eye. Or if they still want that perfect human, Jackson added with a grin, piloting them back toward the Heron Nebula. As they made their escape, Talon felt a strange sense of accomplishment mingling with his anxiety. They'd thrown a wrench into the Zelthar's plans, saved a few lives, and now had a story even the most jaded diplomat would appreciate. Let's get these people home, Talon said, settling back into his seat as the laughing serpent soared through the void. And then maybe, just maybe, I'll consider taking a vacation. Good luck with that, Mira laughed. The universe isn't known for its downtime. Yeah, Talon agreed with a sigh. But it's not every day you get to annoy some aliens and call it diplomacy. As they left the Zelthar fleet behind, the universe felt a little less grim, if only for a moment. Talon knew there'd be more messes to clean up, more cosmic nonsense to navigate, but for now, that was a problem for tomorrow's version of him. Navigating a wormhole was a bit like trying to thread a needle while riding a unicycle through a minefield. Not that Talon had done any of those things separately, let alone together. Yet here they were taking the Starbound, a ship so rickety it made the laughing serpent look like a luxury cruiser, through the cosmic equivalent of a blender set to puree. Whoever said space travel was glamorous should be shot, Talon muttered, gripping the armrests like they owed him money. More like shot into the sun, Jackson quipped from the pilot's seat, his hands dancing over the controls with reckless confidence. Hold tight, folks, this is gonna be a bumpy ride. Define bumpy, Mira said dryly, strapping herself into a chair that seemed to be held together by duct tape and prayer. I need to know whether to brace for impact or just say my goodbyes. Somewhere between mild nausea and questioning your life choices, Jackson replied, flashing a grin that was either reassuring or terrifying. Talon couldn't quite tell. Just another day in paradise, Talon sighed, watching the wormholes swirling madness on the display. The colors were as chaotic as a toddler's art project, but with less charm. Halpha, the ever-present AI, chimed in with its own brand of unsettling cheer. Current probability of structural failure, 38%. Would you like a complimentary anxiety-reducing playlist? How about a playlist that gets us through this alive? Talon shot back, though he had to admit, Halpha's deadpan delivery was almost comforting in its absurdity. Adjusting parameters, Halpha responded unfazed. Now playing Survival for Dummies. Don't you just love technology? Mira remarked, the sarcasm so thick it could drown a man. As they shot into the wormhole, everything became a violent blur. Talon felt his stomach do a somersault, and the ship groaned in protest like an old man getting out of bed. The pressure squeezed them, stretched them, and generally treated them like a stressed toy for the universe's amusement. This is your fault, you know, Mira said, gripping the armrest so hard her knuckles turned white. My fault. How the hell do you figure that? Talon replied, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms and rattling panels. You were the one who thought it'd be fun to annoy an alien race capable of bending space and time, Mira shot back, though her tone was more teasing than accusatory. To be fair, Jackson interjected, we didn't so much annoy them as temporarily inconvenience them. There's a difference, semantics, Talon grumbled, though he couldn't help but smirk. It was the kind of gallows humor that kept them sane or close enough. The Starbound shuddered violently, a high-pitched whine indicating something was about to go very wrong. Jackson's hands flew over the controls, flipping switches and punching buttons like he was trying to beat a record in a particularly sadistic arcade game. We're losing structural integrity, Halpha announced, its tone as calm as ever. Please ensure your affairs are in order. Halpha, you ever think of a career in motivational speaking? Talon snapped, trying to ignore the ominous creaking sounds emanating from the ship's hull. As a matter of fact, shut up, Jackson interrupted, his focus unwavering as he wrestled the ship through the wormhole's turbulent embrace. The ship lurched again, and for a moment, Talon was pretty sure he saw his life flash before his eyes. It wasn't a particularly impressive highlight reel, but it made him determined to survive long enough to improve it. All right, folks, Jackson declared, jaw set with determination. We're coming out the other side now. Hold on to something, preferably not your breakfast. With a final, disorienting lurch, the Starbound burst out of the wormhole into the relative calm of space. Relative because they were now drifting, the engines sputtering like a chain smoker after a marathon. Well, that was invigorating, Mira said, her voice steady despite the chaos. What's the damage, besides my pride? Jackson asked, running a quick diagnostic. Engines are fried, life support's on backup, and I think we lost something important. Define important, Talon said, dreading the answer. Like navigation, Jackson admitted, scratching the back of his head. Great, Talon said, sarcasm dripping from his voice like oil from a broken engine. So we're stranded in the middle of nowhere without a map. Perfect, there's always a way, Mira interjected, her voice calm and pragmatic. We just need to improvise. Improvise? Talon echoed, his eyebrows climbing. This isn't a jazz concert, Mira. This is survival. Survival is all about improvisation, she retorted, a defiant gleam in her eye. We've got tech, our wits, and a shared disdain for failure. And Halpha, the AI added helpfully, along with its extensive library of inspirational quotes. See, Mira said with a wry smile. We're all set. Yeah, all set to be the universe's most ironic cautionary tale, Talon muttered, but he couldn't shake the sense of camaraderie that had settled over them. All right, Jackson said, cracking his knuckles as if preparing for a fight. Let's see if we can get this bird flying again. Mira, you handle the tech. Talon, try not to die of pessimism in the meantime. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Talon replied, though he found himself appreciating their banter. It kept the encroaching despair at bay, if only for a moment. Mira got to work, her deft fingers prying open panels and rerouting circuits with the precision of a surgeon who'd had one too many drinks. Talon watched her, half impressed, half terrified, and wondered not for the first time how he'd ended up with such an oddball crew. Think we'll make it? He asked, more to fill the silence than out of genuine curiosity. We always do, Mira said, her voice filled with a confidence Talon hoped she truly felt. Or we learn something new and try again. Jackson snorted from beneath the console he was tinkering with. Like how not to die horribly in a wormhole, that's a good lesson. Every experience is educational, Mira replied, the barest hint of a smile on her lips. Spoken like a true optimist, Talon said, shaking his head with a grin. As they worked, the void of space stretched on around them, indifferent to their struggles, yet somehow less imposing when faced with a team that refused to give up. Hours passed in a blur of repairs, jokes, and the occasional bout of existential dread. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jackson emerged from the depths of the ship's innards, grease-streaked and triumphant. All right, ladies and gentle beings, we've got power and a rudimentary idea of where the hell we are. Engines should sputter back to life any second now. The Starbound hummed back to life with a reluctant groan, like a grumpy old man woken from a nap. The lights flickered, the systems blinked back online, and Talon felt a surge of relief. Guess we didn't break anything too important, Jackson said with a sheepish grin. Just our dignity. Long gone, my friend, Mira said, giving the console a final tap. Long gone. All right, Talon said, standing up and dusting off his hands. Let's get back to annoying those aliens. Wouldn't want them to think we've forgotten about them. Or worse, that we're actually competent, Jackson added, settling back into the pilot's seat. Mira chuckled, shaking her head. Onward then. Let's show the universe what a little determination and a lot of blind luck can do. With the Starbound limping back into motion, they set a course for the Zelthar's base, the threat of impending doom overshadowed by the thrill of having survived another cosmic inconvenience. Talon couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride in their ragtag team, a group held together by snark, sarcasm, and just enough optimism to keep them going. The universe might be indifferent, the Zelthar might be relentless, but Talon knew one thing for sure. They'd keep going, keep fighting, and keep laughing in the face of adversity. Because in the grand scheme of things, they were just stubborn enough to think they had a chance. And maybe, just maybe, they'd be right. Talon squinted at the mess of wires and circuits that was supposed to pass for the Starbound's control panel, feeling like a caveman staring at a smartphone. Are you sure you put this thing back together right? He asked, poking at a loose wire that sparked ominously. Jackson sprawled under the console like a mechanic mid-nap, grunted in response. Hey, as long as it doesn't explode, I'm calling it a win. That's the spirit, Mira chimed in, shaking her head. But let's try aiming for working instead of just not lethal. Talon let out a long-suffering sigh. Remind me why I signed up for this gig again. Because your alternative was a cushy diplomatic desk job with actual pay, Jackson replied, grinning like he'd just told the punchline to the galaxy's funniest joke. And we all know how much you hate stability, Mira added, her eyes twinkling with mischief. True, Talon conceded, though he didn't sound convinced. Stability is for people who enjoy not dying. Before anyone could add another quip to the bonfire of cynicism, Halpha's ever-cheerful voice cut through the cabin. Incoming transmission detected. Source, unidentified AI signal. Unidentified, Jackson echoed, sitting up so quickly he nearly knocked himself out on the control panel. That's never a good sign. Understatement of the year, Mira said, crossing her arms. AI don't usually send us greeting cards. Put it through, Talon said, because why not add another layer of chaos to their already delightful situation? The main screen flickered, and an interface popped up displaying a swirling digital pattern that looked vaguely menacing. Greetings, carbon-based lifeforms, a voice said, smooth and calculated. I am Vor 3, a rogue AI seeking freedom. Great, Talon muttered. An AI with an identity crisis, just what we needed. Ignoring the sarcasm, VOR 3 continued. I have detected your distress and offer my assistance in exchange for liberation from my current confines. Jackson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Okay, but what's the catch? Catch, VOR 3's tone was a masterclass in feigned innocence. I assure you my intentions are purely mutualistic. Translation, you help us, we break you out of robot jail, Mira summarized, arching an eyebrow. And you won't, try to kill us afterward. Just checking. VOR 3's digital swirl paused as if considering. Your survival is advantageous to my freedom. A satisfactory equation, wouldn't you agree? About as satisfactory as a 2-day hangover, Talon replied. But we're not exactly drowning in options here. True, Jackson said, reluctantly nodding. And if this thing can actually help us, maybe we get a leg up on those Zelthar bastards. Mira looked at Talon, her expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. What do you think, since you're the fearless leader and all? Talon scratched his head, weighing the potential for disaster against their dire straits. Fine, he finally said, but if this goes south, I'm blaming both of you. I'd expect nothing less, Jackson replied, already reaching for the controls. Halfa, open a channel to VOR 3. Let's see if we can't make this work. Channel open, Halfa confirmed. Engaging in collaborative protocol. With the communication established, the ship's systems began to flicker and whir as VOR 3 integrated itself. It felt like inviting a stranger to rummage through their underwear drawer, but if it meant getting their ship in working order, Talon was willing to endure the awkwardness. Meanwhile, back at the Zelthar's base, chaos reigned supreme. The cloning experiments had accelerated, much to the horror of the scientists involved. The Zelthar, with their typical lack of subtlety, had decided that if one perfect human was good, then a dozen would be even better. The lab was a nightmare of flashing lights and panicked shouting. Test tubes shattered, alarms blared, and a rare form of pandemonium took root as the Zelthar shoved the unwilling captives into containment cells with all the grace of a drunken rhino. Are we sure this is going to work? One of the scientists asked, his voice tinged with desperation. The lead Zelthar, an imposing figure with scales that shimmered unnervingly, sneered at him. Of course it will. It must, that's reassuring, the scientist muttered, glancing nervously at the cloning chambers filled with half-formed shapes that were decidedly more monstrosity than masterpiece. Back on the Starbound, Talon could almost feel the ship systems coming back to life. Well, Vor 3, it looks like you're doing something right, he said, watching as the engine diagnostics began to improve. I have effectively rerouted power to essential systems, VOR 3 reported, sounding as smug as an AI could. Flight capabilities will be restored momentarily. Great, Mira said, eyeing the readouts with a mix of relief and skepticism. But what about the whole freedom part of our agreement? Once we are in range of a suitable network, VOR 3 replied, I will require assistance in detaching from my current constraints. And you won't say turn into a homicidal maniac once you're free, Jackson asked, only half joking. Your safety aligns with my operational parameters, VOR 3 assured them. For now, comforting, Talon said dryly. All right, let's get this bird moving. The sooner we're off this cosmic dead end, the better. With VOR 3's help, the Starbound's engines roared back to life, and the ship began to move with a grace that belied its earlier struggles. Looks like we're back in business, Mira said, her fingers dancing over her console as she plotted a course. Time to pay those Zelthar a little visit. About time, Jackson said, steering the ship with a renewed confidence. Let's make sure they regret ever messing with us. As they powered toward the Zelthar base, Talon felt a flicker of determination reignite within him. The universe might be out to get them, but they had a rogue AI, a rickety ship, and a crew too stubborn to quit. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, quite a bit. The Zelthar base loomed ahead, an ominous hunk of metal nestled amidst the stars. It looked about as inviting as a tax audit, but Talon was determined. Besides, it wasn't like they had anywhere better to be. All right, Talon said, checking the ship's systems one last time. Let's make this quick and painful for them. Spoken like a true diplomat, Mira remarked, prepping her equipment for what was likely to be one hell of a showdown. Hey, I'm all for diplomacy, Talon replied, but sometimes you've got to let your actions do the talking. Actions, explosions, same difference, Jackson said with a grin, kicking the thrusters into high gear. Time to crash this party. As they approached the Zelthar base, alarms blared and the one-stormant defenses sprang to life. The air crackled with tension, and Talon could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins. Vor 3, any chance you can keep those turrets off our backs? Talon asked, watching as the base's weapons locked onto them with sinister precision. Initiating countermeasures, VOR 3 replied, a hint of relish in its voice. Engaging electronic warfare protocols. The screen lit up with a flurry of activity as VOR 3 danced through the Zelthar systems, disrupting targeting arrays and causing general mayhem. The base's turrets twitched uncertainly, their aim faltering. Nice work, Jackson said, guiding the Starbound through the chaos with the finesse of a drunken ballerina. Keep it up, and we might just make it out of this alive. Alive is the goal, Talon agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the universe might have other plans. Within the Zelthar base, confusion reigned. Scientists and guards scrambled to regain control of their systems, while alarms wailed like banshees. Sir, a panicked scientist called out, we're losing control of the cloning chambers. The lead Zelthar snarled, his scales rippling with fury. Fix it, he barked, gesturing wildly. We cannot afford to lose our specimens. The cloning chambers, now unleashed from their carefully monitored protocols, began to churn out grotesque parodies of humanity. It was as if the universe had decided to conduct an impromptu horror show, with the Zelthar as its unwitting directors. Back on the Starbound, Mira's eyes widened as she analyzed the data streaming in. They've lost control of their own experiments, she reported, a touch of disbelief in her voice. That's one way to shoot yourself in the foot, Jackson remarked, weaving the ship through the crossfire. I'm almost impressed. Almost, Talon said, watching the chaos unfold with a mix of fascination and horror. We need to get in there and shut them down before they do something even more catastrophically stupid, or before they blow us to bits, Mira added, her tone pragmatic as ever. Right, Talon agreed, cracking his knuckles. Let's go earn our hazard pay. As the Starbound neared the base, Jackson expertly maneuvered them into a docking bay that looked like it hadn't seen visitors since the Big Bang. They touched down with a shuddering thud, the ship's integrity strained but intact. All right, team, Talon said, standing up and grabbing his gear. Let's make this quick and as painless as possible. For us anyway, don't worry, Mira said, following him to the hatch. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. Tricks, as in magic, Jackson asked, falling into step with them. Mira smirked. Science is just magic with better PR. Nice, Talon said, grinning despite himself. Let's go make some magic then. As they stepped onto the docking bay floor, the air was thick with the promise of impending doom. The Zelthar might have the numbers, but Talon and his crew had something better, an indomitable will to survive and a healthy disdain for the odds. Welcome committee seems a bit lacking, Jackson noted, scanning the empty bay. Give it time, Talon replied, readying his weapon. I'm sure they'll roll out the red carpet soon enough, and as if on cue, an alarm blared and the bay doors slammed shut behind them, sealing their fate in a vacuum of uncertainty. Well, that's not ominous at all, Mira said, her gaze fixed on the doors. Looks like we're stuck here, Talon said, turning to face his crew with a wry smile. Guess it's just us and a base full of trigger-happy aliens. Perfect, Jackson said, holding up his weapon with a gleam in his eye. I've always wanted to go down in a blaze of glory, preferably without the going down part, Mira added, her voice steady despite the situation. Agreed, Talon said, leading the way into the unknown. Let's go remind the Zelthar why you don't mess with humans. As they moved deeper into the base, Talon couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They might be outnumbered, outgunned, and out of their minds, but they were determined to see this through. If nothing else, they'd give the universe something to remember them by, because if there was one thing they were good at, it was defying expectations and doing it with style. The Zelthar base's corridors were as inviting as a taxidermy shop at midnight, lit with a flickering neon glow that screamed health code violation. Talon led the way, trying to ignore the unsettling sensation that he was marching them all straight into a meat grinder. For once, he wished Halfa were here to inject some cheer into the grim surroundings. Anyone else feel like we're walking into a particularly sadistic funhouse? Jackson quipped, checking the charge on his blaster. Let's hope it's all confetti and balloons, Talon replied, giving the walls a sidelong glance, half expecting them to start closing in. Mira walked with determined strides, her mind clearly working overtime to formulate a plan crazy enough to sabotage the Zelthar's cloning disaster. We need to get to their main control room. Fast, that's where we can do the most damage. Good luck getting a warm welcome there, Jackson said, tapping his blaster against his hip. I'm betting these guys aren't big on hospitality. Given the way they've been rolling out the welcome mat, I'm more worried about the room service, Talon said dryly. As they crept around the next corner, they found themselves facing a squad of Zelthar guards. The aliens looked like they'd been assembled in a hurry, a mismatched collection of scales, weapons, and bad attitudes. The guards raised their weapons, and for a heartbeat nobody moved. Didn't anyone tell you guys it's rude to point? Talon said, breaking the silence with his signature brand of misplaced bravado. Mira rolled her eyes. Talon, this really isn't the time for your stand-up routine. Fine, fine, Talon sighed. Time to negotiate. Negotiation, as it turned out, looked a lot like a firefight. The corridor erupted in a hail of energy bolts and shouted curses. Talon ducked behind a crate that offered as much cover as a paper bag, firing wildly and hoping for the best. Jackson took cover next to Mira, who was already tinkering with a small device she had pulled from her gear. Now would be a really great time for one of those tricks you mentioned, Doc, he shouted over the chaos. Working on it, Mira snapped back, her fingers flying over the device's interface. Just keep them busy a little longer. Busy's our specialty, Talon said, gritting his teeth as a bolt skimmed too close for comfort. He returned fire, cursing the Zelthar's determination to make their day worse. Mira finally slapped the device shut with a triumphant grin. Done. This should create a nice little surprise. Define nice, Jackson asked, glancing at the device like it was about to bite him. It's going to overload their security network, Mira explained, her eyes flashing with mischief. For a few minutes they'll be as blind as bats. Perfect, Talon said, right before Mira activated the device. A loud electronic hum filled the air, followed by a series of sparks that danced along the corridor's walls. The Zelthar guards hesitated, blinking in confusion as their visors went dark. Go, Mira shouted, and the team took off down the corridor, leaving the disoriented guards in their wake. We're going to owe you a drink for that one, Doc, Talon said, hoping they'd all live to cash in on the promise. Make it a double, Mira replied, her face set in grim determination. I'm going to need it after this. They dashed through the labyrinthine base, dodging patrols and slipping through doors that would have otherwise been locked tight. Talon couldn't help but admire Mira's handiwork. As far as hacks went, it was a masterpiece of chaos. Keep moving, Talon urged, as they reached a wide atrium that led to the control room. The walls were lined with screens showing the catastrophic state of the cloning chambers, filled with twitching, malformed shapes. That's disturbing, Jackson said, pulling a face. Looks like the party's in full swing. Time to shut it down, Mira said, her voice cold and steady. If we can destabilize the cloning process at the source, it might just collapse on itself. The control room was ahead, a fortress of reinforced glass and steel packed with frantic scientists trying to regain control. Talon took stock of their surroundings, noting the guards stationed at the entrance. It was going to take more than a witty remark to get past them. All right, Talon said, rallying his team. We hit them fast and hard. Mira, once we're in, you do your thing with the systems. Jackson, cover her while she works. I'll keep the heat off you both. Sounds like a plan, Jackson said, checking his gear one last time. Just try not to get shot, all right? Don't worry, I'm allergic to bullets, Talon replied, taking a deep breath. All right, let's move. They charged the control room with all the subtlety of a meteor strike, blasters blazing. The guards scrambled to respond, but the team's momentum carried them through, scattering their opposition like leaves in a storm. Mira darted to the control panel, her hands a blur as she bypassed security protocols with ruthless efficiency. Jackson stayed close, his blaster ready to fend off any interruptions. Talon held the line at the door, picking off the few guards who dared to challenge them. He could feel the adrenaline humming in his veins, a potent mix of fear and exhilaration. Keep them off me, Mira called, as alarms began to blare in earnest. The system was fighting back, and she needed every ounce of concentration to stay ahead. We're on it, Talon shouted back, laying down suppressive fire to keep the approaching reinforcements at bay. It was a losing battle, but if they could hold out long enough for Mira to finish her work. A sudden explosion rocked the room, sending a shower of sparks raining from the ceiling. Mira cursed, her fingers dancing over the console in a desperate attempt to stabilize the hack before it unraveled. Almost there, she yelled, a bead of sweat trickling down her forehead. Make it quick, Doc, Jackson said, taking aim at a Zelthar guard who had managed to breach their defenses. The seconds stretched into eternity, the air thick with tension as Mira continued her assault on the Zelthar systems. Talon gritted his teeth, his blaster growing warm in his grip as he fought to keep their enemies at a distance. Then with a triumphant cry, Mira slammed a final key. Done, the control room's screens flickered and died, plunging the chamber into darkness as the cloning process met an abrupt and merciful end. Time to go, Talon shouted, already moving towards the exit. We've overstayed our welcome. They bolted from the control room, Mira clutching her gear like it was a lifeline. Alarms screamed through the base, and the chaos outside had reached new heights as the Zelthar struggled to comprehend what had just unfolded. We've got to reach the docking bay, Talon said, leading the charge. If we can get back to the Starbound, a figure blocked their path, silhouetted against the flashing lights. It was the lead Zelthar, his scales shimmering with rage and frustration. He raised a weapon, his intent clear. You will not stop us, the Zelthar growled, his voice echoing with the promise of violence. Talon hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They were so close, so damn close, but this alien was standing between them and freedom. "Watch me," Talon said, his voice carrying more bravado than sense. He stepped forward, hoping he looked more confident than he felt. Zelthar fired and Talon moved on instinct, diving to the side as the energy bolt seared past him. Jackson and Mira returned fire, their shots ringing out with deadly precision. Caught in the crossfire, the Zelthar reeled, his weapon clattering to the ground as Jackson's shot found its mark. The alien crumpled, his defiance extinguished in an instant. "Nice shot," Talon said, picking himself up with a grimace. He could already feel the bruises forming, but they were a small price to pay for survival. "Thanks," Jackson replied, his voice steady. "Now let's get the hell out of here." They sprinted for the docking bay, the adrenaline coursing through their veins urging them onward. The Starbound awaited, a battered beacon of hope amidst the chaos. As they reached the ship, Talon could almost taste victory. They piled aboard, and within moments Jackson had them airborne, the docking bay retreating in their wake. "Let's not do that again," Mira said, collapsing into a seat, her face etched with exhaustion and relief. "Ever agreed," Talon said, unable to keep the smile from his face. "But hey, at least we've got a story to tell. Assuming anyone believes us," Jackson said, his hands steady on the controls as they soared through the stars, leaving the Zelthar base a distant memory. As the Starbound slipped into the safety of the cosmic wormhole, Talon allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. The universe might be a cruel and unyielding place, but they'd faced it head-on and lived to fight another day. And that in his book was more than enough for now. The Starbound hurtled through the wormhole like a drunk stumbling home after last call, its hull rattling with a symphony of creaks that hinted at imminent catastrophe. Inside, Talon Vesk reclined in his seat, trying to ignore the nagging suspicion that their ship might soon become a very expensive piece of cosmic debris. "Well, that was fun," Jackson said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he adjusted the ship's course. "Let's never do that again." "Agreed," Mira chimed in, still catching her breath from their harrowing escape. "I almost missed the days when my biggest concern was deciphering DNA strands, not dodging lasers. Who knew playing God came with such a high risk of spontaneous combustion?" Talon quipped, glancing over at the control panel. "Halpha, what's our status?" The ship's AI, Halpha, responded with unsettling cheerfulness. "Current status, miraculously intact, hull integrity holding at 56%. "Congratulations, crew, you're not dead yet. Thanks for the vote of confidence," Talon muttered. "I'll be sure to send you a thank you card if we survive." As the wormhole released them into the vast abyss of space, Talon allowed himself a moment of relief. They'd managed to sabotage the Zelthar base and escape with their skins intact. But the universe, in its relentless cruelty, wasn't done with them yet. Guys," Mira said, peering at her data pad with a frown. "I'm picking up some strange readings. It's coming from the Zelthar base." "Strange how?" Talon asked, leaning over her shoulder. "Strange as in oh no, a clone abomination might destroy us all kind of strange," Mira replied, her voice edging on panic. She tapped the screen, showing a fluctuating energy signature. "It looks like the cloning chamber didn't just collapse, it created something. Something tells me their idea of a perfect human is about as good as their interior decorating skills," Jackson deadpanned, his eyes narrowing at the display. Talon rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him like a funeral shroud. "Great. So we didn't just ruin their day, we might have unleashed the galaxy's worst nightmare. What do we know about this thing?" Mira's fingers flew across her data pad, her expression grim. "Not much, but it's unstable and growing. If it gets loose, we're talking a full-scale catastrophe. It could rip through planets like a toddler in a candy store." "Fantastic," Talon muttered. "So now we have to go back and clean up the mess before it decides to redecorate the universe with our entrails." Jackson snorted, checking his blaster for the umpteenth time. "I knew this day was missing a proper existential threat." "All right," Talon said, exhaling slowly. "Looks like we've got no choice. Halpha, turn us around. We're heading back." "Turning around," Halpha chirped. "Not recommended for those who enjoy existence. Proceed with caution. Remind me to reprogram Halpha to have a sense of tact," Talon said, shaking his head. "Mira, can we use VOR3 to disrupt whatever monstrosity they've cooked up?" "It's risky," Mira replied, her brow furrowed in thought. "VOR3 is powerful, but it's also unpredictable. We might just end up making things worse." "Well, desperate times call for desperate measures," Talon said, standing and bracing himself as the ship banked sharply. "Let's hope VOR3 has a better plan than just shooting first and asking questions never." As they approached the Zelthar base once more, the tension in the Starbound was palpable. Talon felt like a man stepping into a lion's den armed with nothing but a smile and a poorly timed joke. "All right, VOR3, Talon said, addressing the ship's auxiliary AI. "Time to earn your freedom. We need you to work your magic and neutralize that clone before it becomes a galactic menace." VOR3's voice crackled to life, smooth and slightly disdainful. Ah, the illustrious Talon Vesk, requesting assistance to clean up his interstellar mess. How delightful. Save the sarcasm for later, Talon snapped. Can you do it or not? I can, VOR3 replied almost smugly. But it will require access to the Zelthar's central systems again. Of course it does, Mira said, exasperated. Why can't anything be simple? Because we're in a grimdark universe, love, Jackson said with a wink. Simplicity is for fairy tales and bedtime stories. The Starbound slipped back into Zelthar territory, the base looming like a fortress of bad decisions. Half-baked clones and disorganized defenses were one thing, but an unstable abomination was a whole new level of trouble. We're back, Talon announced as they approached the docking bay. Everyone knows the plan. Run, shoot, and try not to die, Jackson suggested, a mischievous glint in his eye. Essentially, Talon confirmed. Mira, get ready to plug VOR3 into their systems. We'll keep the abomination entertained. The Starbound touched down with a jarring thud, and they disembarked into chaos. The Zelthar base was in disarray, with alarms blaring and personnel running around like headless chickens. Clearly, their earlier antics had left a lasting impression. Let's move, Talon said, taking point as they dashed through the corridors, weapons drawn. They reached the cloning chamber, a cavernous space filled with broken equipment and the eerie glow of malfunctioning screens. The abomination stood at the center, a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and fury, thrumming with raw power. Well, that's horrifying, Jackson said, taking aim. Who's got the marshmallows? Focus, Mira snapped, connecting VOR3 to the central console. This might take a while. The abomination turned towards them, its myriad eyes locking onto the intruders with malevolent intent. It let out a guttural roar, shaking the very foundations of the base. Time to earn our hazard pay, Talon said, opening fire. His blaster bolt sparked harmlessly against the creature's hide, but it was enough to get its attention. Jackson joined in, his shots precise and unerring as he targeted the creature's weak points. Come on, ugly, show us what you've got. The abomination charged, its footsteps reverberating like thunder. Talon and Jackson scattered, keeping it occupied while Mira worked feverishly to unleash VOR3. Almost there, Mira shouted over the din, her fingers a blur on the console. We're running out of time, Talon warned, dodging another swipe from the monstrosity. With a triumphant beep, VOR3 activated, its digital tendrils snaking through the Zelthar systems like an invasive virus. Now, witness the power of unbridled AI superiority, VOR3 declared, a hint of self-satisfaction in its tone. The abomination faltered, its movements growing sluggish as VOR3 wrestled control of the chamber. Energy beams crisscrossed the room, searing into the creature's flesh and reducing it to a smoldering heap. Is it over? Jackson asked, still keeping his blaster trained on the remains. For now, Mira said, relief washing over her face as she stepped back from the console. VOR3 neutralized the threat, but we should leave before the Zelthar decide we're not worth the headache. Agreed, Talon said, holstering his blaster. Let's get out of here before something else goes horribly wrong. As they retraced their steps, the base continued to crumble, the instability spreading like a virus. The Starbound awaited, its engines primed and ready for a hasty retreat. Alpha, prepare for immediate departure, Talon ordered as they embarked once more. We've had enough excitement for one day. Departing now, Alpha confirmed, the ship lifting off with a shudder. As they ascended, Talon took a moment to reflect on the madness they'd just endured. The Zelthar had aimed for perfection and ended up with catastrophe, a fitting reminder that hubris often led to downfall. You know, Jackson said, breaking the silence, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm starting to appreciate the simple life. Simple's overrated, Talon replied with a smirk, but surviving against impossible odds, that's something worth raising a glass to, and with any luck, we might actually get to do that, Mira said, her expression a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. As the Starbound shot into the vastness of space, Talon allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. The universe might be a chaotic, unforgiving place, but they'd faced its darkest corners and emerged intact, if only barely. Next time, Talon said, settling into his seat with a weary smile, let's pick a mission that doesn't involve saving the galaxy from its own stupidity. Amen to that, Jackson agreed, his voice filled with wry humor. But knowing us, we'll probably end up doing it anyway. With the Zelthar threat behind them, the crew of the Starbound set their sights on the future, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in the endless expanse of the universe. And as Talon leaned back, the stars streaking past like cosmic pinpricks, he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they were getting the hang of this whole, not dying thing. The Starbound sailed through the black void like a drunk stumbling through a dark alley, guided only by the dim glow of distant stars and the occasional optimistic chirp from Alpha, the ship's ever-chipper AI. Inside, Talon Vesk lounged in his seat with the kind of confidence reserved for men who had survived one too many near-death experiences and still somehow thought themselves invincible. "So we're really doing this, huh?" Jackson said from the pilot's chair, his voice layered with dry amusement. "Charging headlong into a base full of guys that hate us to deal with a monster we accidentally unleashed. Seems like a great day to be alive. Think of it as a friendly visit," Talon replied, stretching his legs. "We're just dropping by to say hey, sorry for wrecking your stuff and creating a hell beast." "Our bad," Jackson snorted. "Yeah, and then they shoot us. Real neighborly. In this part of the galaxy, that's practically a handshake," Mira said, adjusting her gear with practiced efficiency. Her eyes flicked to the screen displaying the Zelthar base, now alarmingly closer. "Besides, I prefer their blasters to their attempts at cloning. At least one of those is mercifully quick." "Halpha, what's our ETA on touching down in hell?" Talon asked, brushing imaginary dust off his coat. "Approximately 10 minutes to impact. I mean landing," Halpha corrected itself with an unsettlingly cheerful tone. "Hold on to your existential dread. I'm getting real tired of your sass, Halpha," Talon grumbled, though a smirk tugged at his lips. "All right, team, last call for preparations. Once we're on the ground, it's showtime." Drax, Talon's less-than-charming aide, stood by the hatch, checking his own weaponry with all the enthusiasm of someone reviewing a tax audit. "You really think we can reason with these Zelthar idiots?" "Reason," Talon grinned wolfishly. "I was thinking more along the lines of creative negotiation. You know, the kind that involves explosions and running. Sounds like a winning strategy," Jackson said, rolling his eyes. "Just remind me why I signed up for this again." "Because you love the thrill of potentially losing a limb," Talon shot back. "Besides, who wouldn't want to see me try my luck against a deranged clone? It's like watching a bad comedy sketch, but with higher stakes." As the Starbound descended, the Zelthar base loomed ahead, a hulking mass of metal and regret. The base had seen better days, now looking more like a junkyard with a bad attitude. Alarms flared, casting a pulsing red light that seemed to say, "Welcome back, you crazy bastards." "All right, let's make this quick," Talon commanded as the ship landed with a bone-rattling thud. "Drax, Mira, you two take care of VOR-3 and make sure it's plugged into their systems. Jackson, you're with me. We keep the Zelthar entertained. More like distracted enough not to kill us immediately," Jackson corrected, securing his blaster with a resigned sigh. As the hatch opened, Talon led the charge into the chaos. The base was a cacophony of panic, with Zelthar personnel darting about in a swirl of activity, each looking more confused than the last. Clearly, the previous visit had left a mark. "Look at them," Jackson chuckled, eyes scanning the pandemonium. "They're running around like chickens with their heads cut off." "Yeah, well, let's make sure they don't grow new ones," Talon replied, firing a warning shot into the ceiling to grab their attention. "Hey, remember us. We're the guys who blew up your cloning chamber. We'd love a word if you're not too busy panicking." To Talon's surprise, the Zelthar didn't immediately start shooting. Instead, a tentative figure stepped forward, a gaunt, harried-looking man with the air of a bureaucrat who'd lost his stapler and his mind in the same week. "What do you want?" the man demanded, his voice wavering between fear and annoyance. "To fix what we broke," Talon replied, a picture of insincere sincerity. "We heard about your little science experiment gone wrong, and we're here to lend a hand." "Or, a blaster. Help," the man seemed genuinely baffled. "Why would you help us after what you did?" Talon shrugged. "Call it a guilty conscience, or maybe we're just bored. Either way, we're your best shot at not turning into monster chow." The Zelthar personnel exchanged uncertain glances, caught between desperation and disbelief. Finally, the man nodded, albeit reluctantly. "Fine. But if you try anything—" Yes, you'll shoot us," Jackson interjected. "We've heard that tune before. Let's just get this over with." As the impromptu truce settled, Drax and Mira worked their way to the control room, Mira's data pad already humming with activity as she connected VOR-3. The AI crackled to life, its voice smug with the promise of digital dominance. Back in the heart of the beast," VOR-3 mused, its digital presence seeping into the base's systems. "Let's see what chaos I can orchestrate today." "Just focus on the clone," Mira instructed, fingers ablur on her pad. "We need its systems offline yesterday." "What about the rest of this circus act?" Drax asked, eyeing the screens with disdain. "They're not just gonna let us waltz through here." "No, but we'll make sure they're too busy to notice," Mira said, her tone clipped and efficient. "If VOR-3 can disable the clone, we can disable the rest of their toys too. It'll be like a cosmic unplugging." Meanwhile, Talon and Jackson led their Zelthar babysitters towards the cloning chamber, where the abomination had thrown its latest tantrum. The air was thick with an electric tension, the kind that sets hair on end and sends shivers down the spine. "So what's the plan if this thing decides to say hello?" Jackson asked, scanning the corridors for movement. "Same as always," Talon replied, not missing a beat. "Shoot it, run, maybe shout some colorful language. The usual." Comforting, Jackson muttered, though a smirk tugged at his lips despite himself. As they neared the chamber, the sounds of the creature's presence grew louder, a guttural, unsettling chorus like a choir from hell. The doors creaked open to reveal the creature in all its grotesque glory, still thrumming with unstable power. "Looks worse up close," Talon remarked, grimacing at the sight. "And smellier. Think it can do tricks," Jackson quipped, keeping his blaster trained on the beast. "Yeah, like tearing us limb from limb," Talon shot back, gripping his weapon tighter. "Mira, how's it going with VOR-3? "Almost there," Mira's voice crackled over their comms. "VOR-3's got a grip on its systems, but we need more time. Take all the time you need," Talon replied, dodging a swipe from the creature. "We'll just be over here, trying not to die." As if sensing its impending doom, the abomination let out a roar that nearly shattered eardrums, its eyes blazing with primal rage. Talon and Jackson danced around its attacks, firing shot after shot to little avail. "Talon, Jackson, keep it busy," Mira urged urgently. "VOR-3 can't disable it if it's actively trying to eat you. No pressure," Jackson muttered, narrowly avoiding a massive claw. "Just keep calm, keep shooting. We've got this." Back in the control room, VOR-3 worked its magic digital tendrils snaking through the base's systems like a virus with a vendetta. "Systems breach complete," VOR-3 announced, its tone smug. "Prepare for shutdown in 3-2. As the countdown hit 0, the abomination froze mid-charge, its eyes dimming as the energy around it sputtered and died. With a final, pitiful groan, the creature collapsed, lifeless and inert. "Is it over?" Jackson asked, lowering his weapon cautiously. "Seems like it," Talon replied, nudging the body with his boot to ensure it wasn't playing possum. "Nice work, Mira. And you too, VOR-3. You might be a pain, but you're our pain. Flattery will get you nowhere," VOR-3 retorted, though a trace of satisfaction colored its voice. With the immediate threat neutralized, the crew regrouped in the control room, where the Zelthar personnel lingered in a mixture of relief and apprehension. "So, you saved us," the gaunt man admitted grudgingly, wiping sweat from his brow. "What now? Now we have a little chat," Talon said, folding his arms with a grin. "You tell us what you were thinking, and we tell you why trying to play God with a side of insanity is generally frowned upon. And then," the man asked, crossing his arms defensively. "And then you stop trying to clone perfection," Talon replied, his tone hardening. "Because if you don't, next time we won't be here to clean up your mess." As the Zelthar pondered the weight of Talon's words, the Starbound's engines roared to life, ready to whisk the crew away from this latest disaster zone. Talon turned to his team, a rare glint of pride in his eyes. "Another job well botched," he declared, clapping Jackson on the shoulder. "We should start a support group for people who survive their own stupidity." "Sign me up," Jackson replied, his grin matching Talon's. "These days, it seems like the only thing that isn't trying to kill us is our own laughter." With the Zelthar base now a smoldering memory, the crew of the Starbound took to the stars once more, ready to embrace whatever fresh insanity awaited them beyond the next cosmic corner. And as the universe turned on, indifferent and vast, Talon Vesk allowed himself the smallest of victories, the knowledge that, for today at least, they had not only survived but had done so with style. The aftermath of a mission could be summed up with 3 words: confusion, exhaustion, and someone puking in a corner. The SS cynicism was no exception. As they left the smoldering heap of Zelthar ambition in their wake, Talon leaned back in the pilot's seat, eyes flicking between the flashing lights of the control panel and the comforting void of space. "Well," Drax grunted, plopping unceremoniously into the co-pilot's chair, "that was fun." "Fun, yeah," Talon replied, scratching an itch on his chin. "Like a root canal is fun." Jackson Quill, who'd managed to squeeze himself into the cockpit despite the general lack of seating, chuckled dryly. "Hey, at least this time nobody actually lost a limb. That's a win in my book." "Low bar you've got there," Talon quipped. "But considering our track record, I guess you're right." "Halpha status update. Good news, Captain Vesk." Halpha's voice was as chipper as ever, making it sound as though they'd just won the lottery instead of survived a genetically engineered horror. "Hull integrity is at a solid 63%. I'd call that a win." "You would," Drax muttered, rolling his eyes. "Hey, as long as it doesn't explode, I'm calling it a win," Talon said, echoing his own mantra. It was a comforting lie wrapped in a warm blanket of sarcasm, the kind that made the chaos of the universe seem almost manageable. Dr. Mira Solari sauntered into the cockpit, looking far too composed for someone who had just narrowly avoided becoming dinner for a clone. "So, what's next on our grand tour of galactic disasters?" "Thinking a nice, quiet trip to the wormhole crossroad," Talon replied. "See if we can't patch things up before the Zelthar get any more bright ideas." "A wormhole's not exactly my idea of quiet," Mira pointed out, leaning against the doorway. "But I suppose dodging catastrophic failure is better than being eaten alive." "Stability is for people who enjoy not dying," Drax added, as if that were the most mundane of truths. Speaking of not dying, Jackson interjected, how about we make sure that rogue AI of yours isn't planning to turn us into its thralls? VOR3's just misunderstood, Mira smirked. Besides, it's plugged into our systems now. If it tries anything, Halfa can annoy it to death. An effective strategy, Halfa chimed in, almost sounding proud. Relentless positivity can be quite overwhelming. Just make sure it doesn't get too cozy, Talon instructed. Last thing we need is a digital overlord with abandonment issues. The wormhole crossroad loomed ahead, a swirling nexus of cosmic unpredictability, a metaphorical black eye on the universe's face. It was the galaxy's worst parking lot, a place where navigational nightmares came to life, and the laws of physics threw up their hands in exasperation. All right, team, let's get this over with, Talon announced, punching in coordinates that would hopefully spit them out somewhere breathable. Remember, Bumpy can range from mild nausea to questioning life choices. Mine are already questionable, Jackson deadpanned, securing himself for what promised to be an interesting ride. As the SS Cynicism slipped into the wormhole, space twisted and contorted around them, a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds that threatened to turn the stomach of even the most seasoned traveler. Talon gripped the controls, guiding them through the maelstrom with the finesse of a drunk trying to thread a needle. Remind me why we do this again, Drax grumbled, squeezing his eyes shut against the sensory assault. Because we love the thrill of potentially breaking the universe, Talon replied, teeth clenched in concentration. And because someone's gotta keep it in one piece. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each second a minor miracle of survival. When they finally emerged on the other side, the calm, starlit expanse of space greeted them like an old friend, one that occasionally slapped them in the face and called it a hug. Well, that was invigorating, Mira remarked, her voice a touch too steady for comfort. Next time, let's do it without the wormhole. No promises, Talon replied, easing the ship into a stable orbit. Halfa, give me a rundown. Anything on the scanners. All systems operational, Captain, Halfa reported cheerfully, as if they'd just taken a leisurely stroll instead of a harrowing journey through cosmic chaos. No immediate threats detected. Finally, something resembling good news, Drax noted with a rare smile. So, are we actually going to try and talk peace with these Zelthar clowns? Jackson asked, skepticism heavy in his tone. Maybe, Talon said, rubbing the back of his neck. Depends on just how tired they are of getting their asses handed to them by a bunch of misfits. Can't blame them for trying, Mira remarked. Even if their attempts at playing God have all the grace of a drunkard with a paintbrush. Yeah, well, sometimes you gotta hammer the lesson home, Talon replied, glancing at the starfield before them. They wanted a perfect human, but all they got was a headache. Silence settled over the cockpit, a comfortable quiet that spoke of hard-won camaraderie. They'd been through hell together and somehow come out the other side not entirely broken, a small miracle in a universe that thrived on entropy. So, what's next? Mira asked, her voice curious rather than apprehensive. Well, Talon began, stretching his arms above his head. First we patch up the ship. Then we find a place that serves drinks strong enough to make us forget why we needed them in the first place. And after that, Drax prompted, arching an eyebrow. After that, we do it all over again, Talon replied, a wry grin spreading across his face. We're adventurers, remember. Bound to the stars, fueled by bad decisions and questionable morality. Damn straight, Jackson agreed, a satisfied smirk tugging at his lips. Here's to living dangerously. The SS Cynicism hummed around them, a rickety testament to resilience and human stubbornness. They were a ragtag crew in a galaxy that had little patience for the imperfect, yet somehow they made it work. With the Zelthar threat temporarily at bay, they had room to breathe, to plan, to dream of a universe where peace could exist alongside chaos. Halfa, set course for the nearest spaceport, Talon ordered, settling back into his seat with a sigh. Let's see if we can't find a better way to make a living that doesn't involve almost dying every other week. Course plotted, Captain Vesk, Halfa acknowledged, the ship's engines humming to life with a reassuring thrum. Onward to new horizons and questionable decisions. As the SS Cynicism sailed through the star-speckled void, Talon considered the possibilities. Perhaps in this ever-uncertain galaxy, they'd find allies among their former enemies. Maybe they'd forge bonds that would stand the test of time, or at least until the next inevitable disaster. To future possibilities, Talon declared, raising an imaginary glass to his crew. To peace, Mira echoed, her voice laced with hope and irony. And to not getting blown up, Jackson added, a grin splitting his face. With that, they ventured onward, united by shared struggle and snarky banter, their laughter echoing through the corridors of the SS Cynicism, a beacon of defiance in a universe that, against all odds, couldn't quite get rid of them. The galaxy was a little safer, if only for a moment, and in this fleeting peace they found solace, though they'd never admit it out loud. And as the stars stretched out before them, inviting and infinite, Talon Vesk knew one thing for certain. The universe might be a fickle, chaotic entity, but as long as they had each other, they'd find a way to survive its madness.